So today's going to be a bit more of a serious video, and it has to do with the way that the Roblox community treats specifically developers or influencers who come out about a traumatic experience and then somehow always find a way to pin it back on the victim as to why they're somehow guilty for what happened to them. And if you guys don't know, there was recently some news that arose last night that a victim came forward for a popular Roblox game called Pressure, basically talking about how they had allegedly been assaulted by somebody who owns the game. Now, I'm going to be very careful with how I word this because obviously I am one to believe the victim. That is personally my stance as someone who has gone through similar stuff and has experienced when people don't believe you and how hurtful that is. I am the first person to believe a victim. So going right off the bat, I 100% believe the victim in this situation. However, because stuff hasn't been proven in a court of law, I am legally obligated to say alleged. That does not mean that I don't believe the victim or don't think what's being said is true, but I have to say alleged for legal reasons. But essentially, yesterday evening, or I guess it depends on your time of day, but a tweet came out by a developer, ex-developer for the Roblox game Pressure. And the reason I'm not naming names and I'm not getting into details is because this specific person has explicitly requested in their document that this is not turned into like Roblox drama, Roblox news. And so I'm very, for specific reasons to accommodate that request, I'm not discussing exactly what has happened, but solely just giving you guys kind of like a very brief kind of explanation of what has happened, as well as linking their Google Doc down below. I will give you a disclaimer. It is a bit longer. However, I did sit down last night and read the whole entire thing. And I'm going to be honest, it was incredibly difficult to read. And I'm really shocked that that kind of behavior was, something that happened at RDC. Much less that's something that was allegedly committed by somebody who has so much power in the community. But regardless, essentially this victim came forward and said, hey, this is what happened to me. I've had people try to silence me, but I'm not going to be silenced anymore. And they released a document to Twitter through a burner account, but they admitted that yes, it was them. They just want to put it on a burner account, so obviously it doesn't get, mass flagged and their account doesn't get taken down. But essentially, this document was incredibly lengthy. It was very, very long, and it had so many details, so many screenshots, so much records of just absolutely every claim this person was making. And again, I have to say alleged for legal reasons, but there is a ton of evidence in this document. I definitely recommend that if you guys do have the ability and time to read it, that you go give it a read, because unfortunately what I've seen is there is some, drama channels, which I understand people want to get their, click or whatever, but some drama channels who have taken this and tried to minimize it into something that it's not. And I think for a situation like this, like there has to be a certain level of respect for what has occurred. And I think the only way to really do respect to the variety of things that have occurred, the allegations that have been made, is by actually fully reading the victim's document and their words, like directly from their own mouth. You know what I mean? So I will link that document down below, but a quick trigger warning because it does have, some graphic depictions of what occurred, or descriptions, I guess I should say, of what occurred. But regardless, this developer came out and said, hey, like, people have tried to silence me, but I'm not scared anymore, and they released this document. And I'm going to be honest, I was absolutely sick at the response from the Twitter community. Now, this is something that I find the Roblox community does quite a bit, is that when someone first comes out about something that's happened to them, the initial wave is going to be people, being like, oh my God, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Oh my God. And people being, really believing of the victim, which I think is good. And I think that should keep going. But the issue is that people, when they hear about a situation, specifically in the Roblox community, they immediately go and they will harass somebody else. And in this situation, there was a lot of harassment towards the game owner, which, is it warranted? It's alleged, but hey, I'm not going to necessarily say anything about that, but essentially there's a lot of harassment towards the owner, of people calling for an explanation of what was going on. And the first stage is people believing the victim, being like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And that's when a lot of the performative Twitter activists came out of the woodworks, which I find anytime there's a drama on Twitter, there are these accounts that, I'm going to be honest, they're the most terrible human beings known to man. They don't actually give a shit about anything that's happened. They simply just will be like, this is so disgusting. I can't believe someone would do this. And meanwhile, there's allegations that they've done the exact same thing to somebody else. So there's a lot of hypocrisy in the Twitter community, specifically in the Roblox Twitter community. But essentially that's when, kind of like the keyboard warriors come out and try to act like saviors in the situation, which is distasteful in the sense that it kind of, takes away attention from the situation at hand and tries to draw it to yourself. It's very narcissistic, but that's something that happens. And that's what happened yesterday, was that there's a lot of people who are like, this is so disgusting, guys, beware of this. And there are some people that were legitimate in their concerns and were actually trying to spread awareness, whereas there were other people who have a track record of being terrible people with allegations that they've done similar things, who are out preaching about consent and, being respectful of other people, when it's like, babe, you can't even do the exact same thing. Like, what are you talking about, you hypocrite? But regardless, that was kind of the first wave of stuff that happened. Following that was a secondary wave, and this is where the wave of rumors started to come in. I find this is a consistent thing in the Roblox, again, Twitter community, where when something comes up or an allegation is raised, there's again the first stage and the second stage, where people will start to make up rumors that, well, guys, I don't know, I just think it's a little bit interesting that they left out this part, or I just think it's a little bit, telling that they didn't talk about this. And basically, people will attempt to poke holes in the victim's story and will try to basically do anything they can to discredit them. This kind of is typically done through quote tweeting the original person's tweet and saying, oh, well, this doesn't add up, or well, this doesn't make sense. And 9 times out of 10, the answer is in the document itself, but these people are just too illiterate to actually read the full document. I don't know why. But regardless, that's when the doubt starts to set in. The community tries to plant seeds of doubt, whether that be because they're associated with the person who's being accused or just because they're a shit disturber. I don't know. But essentially, they'll start to plant seeds and say, hey, this doesn't make sense. I think you're lying. And that is exactly what happened in this situation. There has since been a wave of people, specifically some people with large follower bases, that have been going around saying, guys, this doesn't add up. Or guys, I think they're lying. And people who have purposely tried to discredit this person and are trying to stir up drama and get clout from blatantly lying about this person. And that's where the third wave comes in, is people then trying to flip it onto the victim and make the victim look like a bad person. That's exactly what we are seeing currently on the Roblox Twitter community. There is a variety of accounts that have been fabricating completely false and obviously faked screenshots of the victim saying things that they very obviously never said, and are trying to parade them around on Twitter to somehow discredit the victim's experience because, oh, allegedly you said this, even though the fonts in the screenshots don't even match. You know what I mean? And that's what I just think is so disgusting about the Roblox community. I don't want to get too much into it, but my goodness, the way the Roblox community is just so utterly performative really irks me, especially in situations like this. When you have a developer, allegedly, who has done something terrible, who owns a very popular game on Roblox, who has allegedly taken advantage of a developer who there was a bit of a power balance there, and there was a lot of records and screenshots of, just the methods and the language that was used. And I have to say, I've seen a lot of people saying that the victim is interpreting the language wrong and that it isn't actually what the victim is claiming it to be, where it's, coercion, stuff like that. But that's not accurate. And that's what really disgusts me, is that a lot of people are trying to take things out of context or to say that the victim is exaggerating, when the victim in this situation, everything they said in that document, at least to my understanding, my perspective, is 100%, indicative of coercion or someone trying to persuade you to do certain things, or trying to, create this sort of reliance or Stockholm syndrome and stuff like that, or, trauma bonding. And those are all just incredibly accurate things that this victim was able to have the self-awareness to identify, which I think is amazing. But then people are trying to scold them on what it actually is, when first of all, you weren't there, and second of all, you have no fucking clue what you're talking about. And that's what really, really makes me angry. Is that you have someone who maybe isn't as popular, doesn't have as much, I don't even know what to call it, social credit in this situation. They don't necessarily have as much of a reputation of being this really famous game developer. And so when they come out, people originally, believe them. And then as soon as it becomes, not really convenient for people to set boundaries with this developer, instead of setting boundaries with the owner of the game who's allegedly done terrible things, they then work to actively discredit and dogpile the victim who had the courage to come forward. And I cannot stand it. And the funniest thing too, is that there's a variety of people who have worked for the Game Pressure, who, to my understanding, I guess, had originally been aware of the situation, or at least aspects of it, maybe not the full entirety of it, but they had been aware of a variety of aspects, and that was proven through screenshots submitted on Twitter. And because of that, as opposed to, at that very moment when this stuff was still private, setting boundaries and being like, you know what, I don't want to be associated with this game because of these allegations, they basically did nothing. And they allowed this, were somehow indirect accomplices, some of them, and allowed this behavior to continue without calling it out, without bringing attention to it. So the victim had to suffer alone, and they were made to feel like they were crazy, which is something I cannot stand. And I'm not trying to, reduce this to gender or gender identities or stuff like that, but I feel like there is a certain level of misogynistic, I don't know, just perceptions in the Roblox community that I just cannot understand. And I just don't get it. And what kills me is that these developers, or some people who work for the game, I'm not saying all, there's just a couple, but now have since come out and been like, oh guys, I had no idea, I'm so sorry, I would never work for this game. And then there's screenshots that drop that very much prove otherwise, that you were aware of this and you were actively helping to try and silence the victim from coming forward because your paycheck was on the line. I don't even know, you guys. And I think to a degree, it falls on Roblox's shoulders to help regulate this stuff, because in any large company, at least, if you have someone who's working under you who you are actually profiting from or paying, because that's how DevX works, like Roblox technically pays developers, even though the developers are the ones that make the money, I feel like you have a certain obligation to kind of screen the people that are on there. And obviously, you can't predict somebody's actions before they occur, right? And I'm not trying to say they have to do that. But what I'm saying is, when you have very serious allegations that come out, incredibly serious, life-altering sequence of events that are being, alleged against somebody who is in a position of power on your platform, I feel like you have a duty of due diligence to at least investigate it. And obviously the situation is still incredibly fresh, and there is a lot of details that maybe we don't have access to, but at the same time, the evidence that was presented in the document, in my opinion, is so indisputable. I don't know what kind of excuse you could possibly come up with. And there was a response given by the owner that was I thought it was consensual and I thought this was all good, and it was just kind of I'm gonna make a bigger statement later kind of vibe. But I feel like it's really creepy and scummy of Roblox to allow this game to continue to exist on their platform while these allegations have been raised against the owner of the game, right? And, I understand there's a duality to this where you don't want the developers who worked on the game to be negatively impacted by that. And I agree. People's hard work shouldn't necessarily be destroyed because there was the owner of the game who was, allegedly a bad apple, a terrible person, right? But at the same time, I feel like in this situation, if Roblox is aware of these allegations, which these documents have gotten millions of views, so they certainly have heard of it, or someone at Roblox has certainly heard about this, I would expect that they do some sort of thing where they put these space under review, or they do some sort of thing where they require the ownership to be changed to a different individual. Because when you have these sorts of allegations, yes, they haven't been proven in a court of law, but just the very nature of these allegations, in my opinion, poses a significant risk to the general player base who plays Roblox. Because regardless of, if it was, physical attacking or, other methods of attacking, which I have to be very careful what I say because of YouTube's terms of service, but regardless of the form of abuse is what I'll say, it can impact anybody in the platform, and it's already impacted one person. I feel like we shouldn't have to wait for other people to be impacted by this for it to be worth Roblox doing something about it. Once one person comes forward, I feel like a investigation is warranted in this situation, and I would hope that potentially, the proper authorities are involved, whether it be local police services, Roblox moderation, to potentially, make sure that this person who has these allegations against them isn't necessarily continue to be put in a position of power where they can have control over, a very loving fan base, if you get what I mean. And I'm not calling for the game to be canceled or for people not play it, but there's a lot of people too who I find are taking this situation as some sort of ticket to try and boost their own social rapport or ego or whatever. And they'll be like, hey guys, I'm actually, in light of what is happening with pressure, I'm making a very similar game, and I'm going to be hiring all the developers, or I'm going to be hiring some of them, and we're going to make a better game where we aren't problematic. And I get what you're trying to do here. I get the way you're trying to be perceived, but everybody can see through it and see that you're just trying to make a quick buck by, playing on the downfall of another game because the owner has serious allegations against them. And instead of actually giving a shit and, doing something and trying to support the victim or uplifting victims' voices, you are actively trying to monopolize the situation by creating essentially a copy of the game to replace the old one so that you can make a quick buck off the situation while you honestly do not care about what has happened. And it's really disgusting to me. And again, this is a pattern that is frequently repeated in the Roblox space, and I'm not sure if it's because people just lack social skills, they're chronically online, or if they just have genuinely lack of empathy for anybody else who exists. But I don't know. This whole thing just rubs me so much the wrong way, especially when the victim, in their very lengthy document, mentioned several times, this is not the next Roblox news, it's not the next Roblox drama. And I've seen videos go up today, which obviously I don't name names, but of drama creators being huge Roblox drama, owner of pressure exposed. And it's there's a time and a place, right? And I get that. And I get that certain situations, they have to be brought to attention for awareness, and I get that. But I think being mindful of how you word things and, just the clickbait titles, and there's a lot of people who will take tweets and edit the tweets and, use them in thumbnails. That's something that personally, my thumbnail editor will do, never impersonating anybody's words. But if we want text on the screen, we can't find a tweet that says that exact text. We'll just kind of paraphrase and then put text on a black screen and it will look like a tweet, right? But the issue here is that people are making tweets up and they're fabricating tweets where they're being incredibly ignorant and just crass with their wording, are saying this person R-worded me or this person did this, and they're putting it in a fake fabricated tweet while attaching the original victim's profile and username. And that to me is just you are trying to clickbait people off of the trauma of somebody else, and that kills me. it kills me. And it's, one thing if you're talking about something that somebody has done that's abhorrent and they're terrible and, they're trying to use mental health or they're trying to use some trauma as some sort of parachute for them so they don't have to, face accountability. That's something different. But in this situation where you have a victim and someone who has been heavily impacted by this, who is being transparent and vulnerable with their experience and trying to protect other people, and then you have drama YouTubers trying to profit off of the situation and trying to, like, I don't know, just like clickbait people into thinking like it's something that it's not, or trying to really dramatize the events rather than giving it the justice it deserves, that pisses me off. So with that in mind, I would encourage you guys that if you are, over the age of 13, to go check out this document. I will link it down below. I thought it was incredibly well worded. I thought the victims did an incredible job at, number one, just the amount of evidence in that document, the timestamps, the explanations, which I feel like they oftentimes over-explain themselves because they're just, when you're in a situation like this, you're used to people dismissing you. So I can understand why they would do that, but there's so much detail. There is so much clarity as to their feelings, what was going through their mind. I just think like this has to be like one of the most well thought out documents explaining somebody's situation that I've ever seen. There is no dramatization to it. There is no, trying to sensationalize anything. It is just straight to the point. And I think that, it has a lot of tidbits in there or details that I think would be incredibly valuable to people who are online, especially, younger individuals who may not know the warning signs of this kind of behavior. So I definitely recommend that if you guys do have a chance to give it a read, or at least at the very least skim it, because there's a lot of really important information, red flags that this person points out. They used terminology about certain behaviors that are inappropriate and stuff like that, that I think would be really good for you guys to learn from. But regardless, if you're in a situation like this, there will be people who dismiss you or try to discredit you, but at the end of the day, you know the truth, you know what happened. And I definitely urge anybody in a similar situation to reach out to law enforcement. I know that can be very scary, but at the same time, it's not actually, I wouldn't say it's too complicated to do, at least in my situation. All I did was I went and spoke to a school counselor. You can also speak to a therapist, tell them what happened, and they can actually help you and guide you through the process with like the legal system and who you need to contact, like police and investigators, stuff like that. So I definitely do think that, in those situations, people oftentimes are under the impression that it's really difficult to do, and it can be very difficult mentally, but the actual steps to do it, once you start doing it, you'll find that it actually isn't as overwhelming as you would anticipate. I guess depending on the kind of situation, obviously mine versus this victim versus anybody else's situation will obviously be vastly different, and police services will handle things in different ways. But regardless, if you've experienced something like this, you deserve support and justice, most importantly. And I definitely would recommend that you guys go check out this document in the description below, and I will also link some resources down below as well. So with that in mind, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.